in the way that we're exploring it today is not optimal. Okay, I was taught to breathe that way when I was like 17. I had a teacher who was like, here's this thing called belly breathing, and this is how you should breathe. You shouldn't use any of the ribs up here. You should just let the belly come out. And I just remember working so hard to do it and feeling like I never had air. And then what's interesting about that is I bumped into her again like 28 years later. And she said, I used to do this thing called belly breathing, and it's just, I can't believe I actually taught that. And I was like, yeah, you taught it to me. And it was really hard, you know, to deal with. So the thing is, like, your mechanism is your mechanism. The sensation you have of where the air goes and what part of your lungs it's filling is really dependent on which breathing muscles you're using and which breathing muscles you're allowing to be activated. So now take a full breath. Go ahead and do this again. And take a full breath and allow your hands to spread. And do that a few times. So now you can see that my hands are actually spreading apart. And if you look at me from the side, you'll see that this isn't really going out very much when I inhale that way. It goes out a little bit, but not a lot. And if I don't use the side of the ribs, and I use just the lower ability to breathe, and I use my belly, it goes out a lot. But if I engage the rest of the ribs, it doesn't go out as much. And so I just wanted to bring that up because it's a source of a lot of confusion, and it's not optimal to think of just breathing with your belly. And so then people will also talk about clavicular breathing. So what clavicular breathing is, this is your clavicle, and no, you're not actually breathing with your clavicle. But when you see people like blowing birthday candles out and they go, you know, they're using their deltoids to bring up their shoulders and they're exhaling. Or if you're running really fast, your body will naturally take really shallow breaths that give you the ability to rotate your breathing quickly. And it's not evil. It's not a bad thing. It's a beautiful thing. It's a part of a breathing mechanism that your body knows it needs, because why take a deep breath if you can take 6 breaths in the same amount of time? So that's what's referred to as clavicular breathing. And ideally, you don't want to be using these muscles to raise your shoulders, but sometimes you do need to fill your lungs up to capacity. And if you do fill them up to capacity, your clavicles move. So now watch me take a breath and you'll see that this bone, the clavicle, will move. You can see it come up. So try that on yourselves now. You can even place one finger at the beginning of where your clavicle starts, which is that bump, and the other one on the end, which is on your shoulder, and take a full breath to total capacity and feel how that naturally moves. And partly what's moving is it's not actually the clavicle, because the clavicle rotates like this. What's moving is all of your ribs are spreading. They're spreading widthwise between the rib is spreading, and they're spreading out and away from like the sternum and your spine. And so because everything is spreading and lifting and your lungs are filling with air, this is naturally coming up. So again, another thing you'll hear people say is don't let your air go up here. But I would disagree. I would think, I would like to say that it's useful, especially if you need a lot of air. And some of you know that I've been working on this massive project, the hydrology project, and I've been getting a lot of questions about like, how does that affect your flute playing, or is it the same thing, or are you using same breathing mechanisms? And 2 weeks ago, I got up to 2 minutes and 13 seconds of a breath hold, which was pretty astounding considering that I was like starting with like maybe a 24-second breath hold. And the main thing that I've learned about it is that it's not about the air that's in your lungs, it's about the chemical makeup of the air. And so what happens is once you inhale, the oxygen goes into your blood, and then carbon dioxide comes out of your bloodstream and into your lungs. And then you need to expel the carbon dioxide. Why is that of interest to flute players, and why are we talking about it today? Because if you are taking huge breaths and holding them and sustaining them for long phrases, what you're really expelling then is carbon dioxide rich air, which is poison to your body, and the desire of your body to inhale becomes increased. So it's better to breathe more frequently and keep the air rotating in and the oxygen coming in than to have the air that you're playing with be filled with carbon dioxide. So I mention that because in order to get those more frequent breaths, you use what we call a sip breath. So instead of every time you're breathing going, and then trying to play this long convoluted phrase, instead you would maybe breathe only at, say, 60% capacity, exhale to play the phrase, and keep replenishing the air with the oxygen and releasing the carbon dioxide. The desire to breathe, I've learned from this exploration, comes not from a lack of air in your lungs, and it doesn't come from even a lack of oxygen. It comes because the carbon dioxide in your blood is triggering for a release, and it's triggering for a complete exhalation, and it triggers you to want to inhale. So that's where oboists, for example, run into problems because they've got all this stacked breath. So I'm bringing that up because it's all interrelated into how we breathe, not to kind of expand maybe fully if you don't need it, and not to underexpand, and not to take only what's called belly breaths, but to understand all of the aspects of the breath. So we're going to move into something called the 4 phases of the breath, but before we go there, I'll pause for questions and see if any have come in or if any are about to come in. Okay, looks like I don't see any. Okay, yeah, Ethan. And did I see Lydia's hand go up too? Okay, so Ethan and then Lydia.
Okay, so this is kind of a weird question, but how would you say, like, for example, if we were playing an excerpt like Mendelssohn's Scherzo or like Afternoon of a Faun, and like it's standard to not really breathe within the phrase, like what's a way to, like, you know, incorporate what you're saying, but then make it musical still?
Right, so in that case, you do have to really only breathe where you're supposed to breathe. And so the main thing there is the breath management component. So 2 things. First of all, you need to know what volume of air to take in for your capacity. So if you have like a 4-liter capacity and you need only, these are just numbers, by the way, and you need only 2 liters to get through to the first breath, then you need to have an awareness of your own capacity, like a biological connection, feedback connection to, like, when I breathe this much, how much does it give me going out, and where will that get me? So in terms of your training for an excerpt like that, and this is also in the TVF book where you're able to, like, take a sip breath and then rotate around and try to take enough air for the next note. Your training is going to involve inhalation at different capacities, then the exhalation metered out at different releases, like flow releases, and then you have to then consider how much time do you have to take the next breath. And if it's only a sip breath, what is that? Is it like 1 liter of air that you're getting in? Is it like 0.5? Is it like, 1/100th of a liter? And where will that bring you next? And if you find that it's not going to bring you far enough, then what you need to do is work backwards and make your first breath be a higher capacity and volume than you need for the first phrase, and so that it takes you into that second phrase. And then you use the breath in the middle to just top it off and replenish the carbon dioxide, the air, and get more oxygen in. So it is kind of scientific. And with this project that I've been working on, the breathing is very scientific. Like you have to really know 60% capacity, full exhalation, 80% breath, full exhalation, 100% breath, go down into the water. And it's really should be that way for flute players too, I think. Does that help, Ethan, answer the question sort of?
Yeah, thank you.
But the technique of deep breathing, sip breathing, and all kinds of breathing in between and awareness of your own capacity is really the bottom line. And I don't think we think enough about it as flutists. Lydia, what did you want to ask?
I was wondering if there are any exercises that you would recommend for like expanding your lung capacity. I've done swimming and it was really helpful, but I can't do that all year long. So
Yeah, in fact, I have like this here. Can you guys see what this is? It's a tape measure. These are great. They only cost like $1. They're probably literally $1 at the dollar store. I think they're like $1.50 at Walmart. Okay, so basically what this is a tape measure for sewing. And when I was studying with Peter Lloyd, I think I was 19 when I started studying with him. He had us doing these exercises that we're going to do in a moment. And I remember deciding that I was going to become obsessed with expanding my lung capacity. So I had one of these in my flute case and I kept a journal. And so I highly recommend that you all do this because it's really intriguing and fun and you get to like actually see improvement. And so I started off with measuring my, what you do is you're going to grab it right where here's where your ribs end, you're going to grab it right around the middle. And I would take a deep breath, I would start with an exhalation. So, and then you mark it. So at fully exhaled, I'm like 30 at that point in my ribs. And then I would practice an inhalation. And you hold it and you just inhale and it slides. And so I get up to like a 35. And I remember watching it go from one number to the next, and actually it increased. So here's the scoop on that. And this also kind of speaks to a misunderstanding. The lungs have massive capacity. Your lungs have way more capacity than you use. The reason we cannot access the full capacity is not because of the lungs, it's because of the muscles that control the ribs. So if you have intercostal muscles, which are the muscles between the ribs that are tight and haven't been exercised, and all of the other muscles are also not flexible, then they won't flex to allow for this balloon that's inside your body to fill up. So it's like you have this huge balloon, but you can only blow into the balloon as much as like the little bucket that it's in. So the real job in terms of increasing lung capacity, Lydia, it's not that the lung capacity increases, it's that you're gonna learn to stretch and expand and flex and train and put into great shape your breathing muscles. And the reason you improved when you swam most likely was for two things. The first one was your body's ability to tolerate carbon dioxide in the bloodstream went up because you probably didn't breathe every single stroke. So your body was expending energy, using oxygen, developing poison carbon dioxide, and you were holding onto it. And so you developed an ability to resist the urge to breathe every time, which is what's triggered by carbon dioxide. So that's one thing you noticed. The second thing you probably was happening was because of the way you were breathing, you were exercising those muscles and stretching them, and you became like way more flexible. I think that's so cool. Like, I love that whole thing. And it's not something that I was taught or, that we are typically taught as flutists. So I encourage you all to delve deep and think about it. So let's try some exercises now since Lydia asked the question and it's on my list anyway. So the first thing is, let's do the 4 phrases. No, let's see. Let's do a breathing muscle warm-up exercise. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start by warming up our breathing muscles, and it will also be an awareness exercise. It's going to help you like feel those muscles. So what I'd like you to do is take your hands and clasp them together like this and put them above your head. And you're going to take your arms and put them against your ears. Okay, and now you're going to start inhaling through your nose like you're a little puppy dog, like this. So just kind of little pants, but they go through your nose, and you'll notice, potentially, this is really hard to do on Zoom, but you'll notice while I'm doing it that you can actually see my abdominal muscles are activating the panting. So it's like this. So go ahead and do that. It's kind of hyperventilating, and you can hold at some point and then exhale whenever you feel comfortable doing that. And when you take your final breath, take a deep breath, hold it in, and then when you're ready, exhale and bring your hands down. We've actually done this exercise before in the class, because I think I remember doing it your first semester, Dustin. Didn't we? Something like that. Okay, so once again, and this time, again, these are just little pants, so we're not doing these massive volume increases. We're not like going, we're just doing little pants. So you're just gonna use your abdominal muscle, and you're gonna notice that your lungs are not stretching completely, but your body gets warm. Okay, let's try it again. At your own pace, don't forget to take a deep breath at the end. Okay, so that's a little bit of a warm-up exercise. Now you're going to take your hands and you're going to put them here. This one's really fascinating. I've messed around with this. I've changed it up a couple different ways. I actually learned this from a pranayama master, and pranayama is like the study and the exercise of breath, of prana, your life force, and it comes through the Hindu Vedic tradition. And I went to study with someone for like a week, and all we did was breathe all day. So this exercise comes from him. And what he had me do was, you're gonna inhale on one twist and you're gonna exhale on the other. So it goes like this. And again, if you can do it, inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, that's better. So it goes like this. And as you twist, kind of try to make the twist deepen as you warm up. Okay, and now switch it up. So you're going to inhale on the opposite side and exhale on the opposite side. Okay, so try that. Okay, and again, you might notice that you feel lightheaded doing these exercises. You just have to kind of explore. We're going to do one more, and then I'm going to ask you to share what you're noticing. So this is one that I made up after working with him, because I was like, oh, this could be really even more amazing for the flute. And that is, see if you can inhale through 4 cycles so that your lungs are filling up and stretching those muscles. And then you're twisting while the rib cage is stretched. So you can only imagine, like, your muscles are expanded and stretched, and then you're adding the other dimension of a twist. You can even hold your breath and do it if you want, like take a deep breath, and then just twist and stretch even further. Okay, so what are some things that people noticed or noticing, or even like as you just maybe take a few breaths for a moment, see if you can notice any kind of stretchiness or warmth or freedom. What are some things that you're noticing? Juan's hand is up. Anybody else want to share? Sammy and Jacob. Let's have the three of you go in that order.
So I noticed the boundary of where my breath can go before the exercise felt very kind of like hard, and I was pushing against it. And then once I finished the exercise, even just doing it for a little bit, I felt kind of that boundary kind of soften up and kind of like give a little bit, so I could breathe. I could breathe more than I previously could.
Yeah, that's exciting. And that's where like the tape measure comes in, because the more like different kinds of exercises that you do that make you fill your lungs to capacity, and then you stretch the muscles around them even more, like that stretchiness is what's going to give you more of your width. Okay, Sammy?
I feel a lot looser and I feel like I can expand more near the top of my ribs. Even just sitting here now, I feel like there's more give to my body in that from that aspect.
Beautiful. Yeah, like more suppleness and stretchiness. And Jacob?
For me, it wasn't necessarily about like expanding. It's more now they feel a lot looser, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like your body just feels more comfortable. Great. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so that was a stretching breathing muscle exercise, and it was a warming breathing exercise. I don't know if you noticed with the panting, actually it's a great thing to use if you're cold, like if you're sitting in a cold car and you're waiting for someone to come out of Qdoba or whatever people do these days during COVID if they're getting food or something. You know, you can actually just sit there and really heat up your body. The other exercise, and I don't think we're going to have time for it, but I'm going to describe it to you. It's also in the front of the book, the Virtuosa Colitis book, is where you then take the four parts of the breath, which I'll describe in a moment, and you suspend them and you increase the increments of that. So the four parts of the breath are the inhalation, the suspension of the breath. So you inhale and your lungs are full and there's a moment of suspension. And then the exhalation, and then what's called the recovery. And that's where like the air goes out and you're completely resting. And notice when you go to bed tonight, in fact, this is something that you can work on to deliberately cause your body to have the parasympathetic nervous system activated, which is the part of your nervous system that calms you down and gets you like super chill and ready for sleep or whatever. Is that you can, if you can time particularly the recovery phase of your breath so that it's longer, you're going to feel more calm. So what that would look like is maybe you would inhale for 4 beats. Normally you would suspend for maybe, a second or 2. Then you would exhale maybe for 3. And then if you're really calm and you're about to go to sleep, you'll notice that you're not really inhaling right away. Your body is just taking a break from breathing. So let's just kind of notice that for now, wherever you're sitting, just allow yourself to breathe in any way you're breathing and see if you can kind of notice the inhalation, the suspension, the exhalation, and the recovery phase. Okay, so how many people noticed that their recovery phase was the longest part of their breathing phase? So a couple of people. And how many people felt that their like inhalation was like the longest part of their breath phase? Okay. And what about the exhalation? Okay. So if your exhalation phase is longer, that means you're controlling it. So good job, Lydia, controlling your exhalation. You were probably breathing like a flute player, weren't you? Because when we use air to make a sound on our instruments, all of that natural cycle flips. Suddenly, our main focus is really on the exhalation phase and delaying it. If you think about it, normally your body is not going to go, that's like way abnormal. What your body wants to do is completely relax all the rib muscles, all the muscles involved in the inhalation. And when that happens, your air just goes. Okay? Go ahead and just with that thought in mind, go ahead and mess around with it again, the 4 phases of the breath. And maybe on purpose, you can start to navigate changing the timing of each phase. Okay, so any interesting things that you noticed that time from anybody? Nathan maybe, and maybe JC? What did you guys notice?
So I definitely noticed that when I was focusing on how long I was doing each thing, I tended to make them all about uniform in length, almost like they were all, say, like 8 beats, because that's usually how I practiced breathing. And so, but then if I was trying to focus on especially the rest part of the phase, that as compared to when I was just breathing naturally before, it felt more necessary to start breathing because I was holding it longer maybe than was comfortable.
Yeah. Okay. JC, what did you notice?
Are you talking about me or the other?
JC Prowse is who I was looking at. Sorry. I forgot. I had to clarify the last names. JC Prowse.
So just sitting there, I mean, like Nathan said, I try to make it all uniform, but I just feel more relaxed as I go. You know what I mean?
Okay. So tonight when you're all going to bed, what I want you to do is just notice what your body naturally wants to do. And it's a form of breathing called tidal breathing, like the tidal waves. And it's quite beautiful if you think about it. Your body has its own beautiful rhythm of breath, just like the waves in the sea. It's like beautifully profound. And see if you can just kind of like notice what it wants to do.
I'm not talking.
What? Oh, can everybody hear me okay? Good. See if you can notice what it wants to do and then kind of start to influence it. Like just say, well, I'm just going to mess around with the recovery and sustain that. And then let it go back to what it wants to do. And then maybe influence the suspension of the breath and then let it go back. One thing that flutists do that is really not in our best interest is we take a deep breath, we hold it, and then we play. And why that's not optimal, again, is because of that CO2 issue. Because once the air is in your lungs, it's already going right, the oxygen's going right into your blood, and it's like a little swirly thing. And once it swirls into the blood, the other part of the door comes around and releases the carbon dioxide back into your lungs. Okay, so it's a really fascinating concept. Juan, did you just send a question?
Carissa has her hand raised.
Okay, great. Let's do Carissa and Juan. Carissa.
Okay, so I've been noticing that I have been holding my breath and not breathing, and I think it's because I've been doing this exercise um, a lot. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I'll find myself not breathing, or I'll feel that I'm not breathing and I need to take a breath. And if you've ever experienced that, if you have any wisdom.
Yeah, so I think when we're not breathing, it's usually like, I think related to stress or like holding, because a holding pattern, because if you think about it, if you're gonna lift something, you take a breath, you hold your breath, and then you lift the thing and you move it around. So sometimes we tend to hold our breath and in anticipation, and it's not really a natural state of relaxation. So the best thing I can say is that you're not feeling relaxed while you're doing that. Is that correct? Do you feel relaxed?
No.
So I would say it's great that you're noticing it. And as you start to notice it, try to think about the 4 phases of respiration. And I would also try to notice if you're holding your breath at the suspension phase or at the recovery phase. Because some people will hold at the recovery. They'll take a deep breath, they'll exhale, and then they hold. That's like a whole different, that's your body telling you something else. Okay, it's really interesting. Okay, so now let's move and wait, was there one more question? Juan had a question, right? What was your question?
So my question was related to the recovery phase of breathing, and a lot of the time, if I'm between phrases while I'm playing, I'll think, breathe sooner, give yourself more time to breathe. But when can we best benefit from the recovery phase in our playing? How would we apply that?
Yeah. So I'm actually also working on this right now in my apnea training for the underwater stuff. And so what they say about it, the scientists, is that anytime you're using your muscles, you're using energy. So what's interesting about that is if you think about the recovery phase, you're not really using a muscle, especially if you're lying down. The only thing beating is your heart. Maybe your eyes are open, right? So if you're trying to save energy, you can decide to prolong that recovery phase and just let your body enter into relaxation, including not using your breathing muscles. However, you don't want to get to a point where you're starving for oxygen. It's possible to delay the recovery phase and enter into like a really sense of calmness. But even during long, let's say 16 bar passages where you don't have to play, I wouldn't hang out in that zone that long. But you might use that to bring peace and that sort of calmness to your parasympathetic nervous system. But use it wisely and train yourself in it. Be like, okay, I'm gonna suspend the recovery phase after I've taken 3 big breaths. I'm gonna feel the warmth, I'm gonna feel the calm come over me, and then I'm gonna start gearing up, and I've got my 3 breaths, and here comes my biggest one, and boom. So again, it's a matter of like utilizing it and knowing exactly what you're going to do for every section of the music. Okay? Great, so let's talk a little bit about some stretches and strength training that's important for flute players. So the first thing I wanted to point out, and now I get to move all of this back. Hopefully everybody can see a little bit. Is that if you stand, let's see, I think this is the best I can do. If everything that we do when we stand, whether we're tucking our pelvis in or bringing our shoulders back, no matter what we do, has an effect on the rest of our alignment. So for example, if I stand with my knees locked and my hips back, I'm going to have a different position on top here. Okay, so if I'm standing with this back and my knees locked, I'm going to have to find a different balance. If I tuck in, or if I slouch down here, then what happens up here is the shoulders round, and then the neck wants to go out to keep my body aligned. So the key is to really be aware of all aspects, kind of like if you break your body into 4 parts, like your neck, this area of your spine, your thoracic area of your spine, your pelvis, and your knees, and of course you can add ankles and everything else. But if you break them into like 4 parts, basically, and you give a scan, a body scan, to asking yourself, where is every one of those parts? That is going to be very helpful, because if one thing's off, it means something else is off. And we tend to have an issue where flutists play forward like this. And a lot of it comes from reading music and looking at a music stand in ensembles when we're younger. Usually if you wear glasses, it's an issue because you tend to want to like bring your head down and look down, and that curves the neck. So, you know, ways to get around that would be to copy your music and tape it on the wall so that at least you're playing up. But ideally what you want, and these are just a couple of little tricks, is to tilt your pelvis forward in what's called a posterior pelvic tilt, and keep your knees kind of spongy. So they're not going to be locked, but they're going to be supple. And that will then trigger the rest of your body to be in really beautiful alignment. And it gives you access to way more breathing capacity because your psoas muscle is not shortened. So what we're going to do now is we're going to explore that for a second. So whether you're sitting or standing, I want you to stick your butts out like this. So you're going to sit with your or stand with your pelvis dipped under like this, otherwise known as sticking your butt out. So you have this arch. And I want you to take a couple of deep breaths in that position. And notice how those breaths feel. So maybe take 3 or 4. Notice how they feel in the different parts of your ribs, in your back. And now you're going to add one more thing. You're going to lift your chest. So let's say you're standing in that position and your teacher says, oh, keep your chest up, but you don't adjust your pelvis. So now go ahead and lift your sternum and keep your pelvis tilted backwards and try to take a few deep breaths like that. Okay. Now you're going to take this position and you're going to tuck it under. Okay, kind of like one of the terms they use in martial arts and Qigong for this is heavy tail. Like imagine that you're an animal and you have a tail that's heavy. So it pulls down, and that is your posterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so this is where you're taking your pelvis and you're tilting it forward. And now go ahead and take some deep breaths. And you can even go ahead now and move between both positions to compare, like this tilt and then the posterior pelvic tilt. And then lifting the sternum or not lifting the sternum. Okay, so what are some things we notice? I like asking this question because I think this is usually a pretty like, whoa, I mean, the difference is pretty huge. Katie.
So in the first position, I couldn't, when I was breathing, there was like no expansion in my back at all, and it was just limited to some forward motion. And then when I pulled my chest up, it felt like the only expansion I was getting was like right here and nowhere else.
Carissa, did you have your hand up?
I did. I was going to say that I naturally sit with my tailbone out, so that felt natural, but my breathing was, I felt that my ribs, basically what Katie said, I felt tightness here in my ribs. So I could feel that it was easier to breathe when I tucked it down.
Good.
But it also felt like I was working harder, like in my hips.
You tuck it forward?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's your psoas muscle. So you may have a psoas muscle that is out of shape, okay? That's the muscle that activates that. And the thing is, like when you're playing in that position where you're a little more tucked forward, so instead of playing like this, you play more like this and you got bendy knees. Like you are definitely activating different muscles. and they may be out of shape, but they need to be put into shape, okay? Great, so we're sort of running out of time, and again, if you need to leave to get to another class, you're welcome to. So I'm gonna show a couple of really important stretches and strength training exercises for the flutist. First of all, starting with the bands. If you're in the studio, there are a bunch of these hanging behind the door in my office, so you can use them, but basically these are called TheraBands. They look like this, and this particular brand of TheraBands have these sewn pockets so that you can stick your hands like in different locations of the band, different distances. Okay, and each color is a different strength. So like the blue one, you can like stretch out and it's so easy. And then there's the silver one and a red one. And then the gold one is like, it's really hard. Okay, so this was shown to me by a chiropractor who I went to because I was having typical flute player problems with that little issue back in there that we all get. And then you're like all tight back in here. And he said that the reason I was having these problems in my shoulder girdle was because my rhomboids weren't strong enough. And I'm like, what's a rhomboid, right? So he's like, all right, you got to do this exercise. So the rhomboids are the muscles that are like right in here, between your shoulder blades. And if those are strengthened, then what happens is you naturally, instead of being in this position all day and strengthening and shortening these muscles, what happens is those counteract this position, and you're able to kind of like, because they're in shape, they pull everything back, and you're able to balance out this issue, and you don't have these problems in the back. So a great exercise to do with these TheraBands, and there are different ways of doing them, is to take the band and straighten your arms like this, and then you pull. But you don't, and you pull and you hold, but you don't pull like this with your arms. You actually pull with the rhomboids. You imagine bringing your shoulder blades together. So if you bring your shoulder blades together while you're holding, you can do this with a belt or something as well. While you're holding this, and you bring your shoulders together and hold, that's being activated by the rhomboid. So that's really great. This can also be used for like stretching. This is a great stretch. So you just put it like around your head like this. And then you take your opposite hands. You can try this right now, even without a band. And you put the hand behind your back like this. And then what you're gonna do, you can just take your hand to do it with this hand here. Then what you do is you pull down while this hand drives down. Okay, so you're kind of bringing your ear to your neck while this hand is pushing towards the earth. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna start to like stretch out all of this. And then you can kind of move your head in different directions. And again, you can also do it with the band so that you'd be pulling like this. And then you can turn, put the other hand back. For me, this is a tighter side, and I think it will be for most of us because we're flute players. If you take your right hand and put it behind your back, and then you're going to take your hand and pull here. And again, you can kind of work it. And if you want to deepen the stretch, guess what? Take a deep breath and hold it, because that's going to pull and strengthen and stretch out all the other muscles. So you take a breath and you pull into that space. Okay, and we'll do one more just for fun. So this is another really important one, and that is to take your fingers, hold your hands here, and so you go from bent arm to straight arm, and then take this hand and just kind of pull back and work it so that you can feel all of this stretch. And then the other hands. Okay, so in closing on this topic, you know, we all do our articulation and intonation and long tones and everything. But the bottom line, the big takeaway is that you are your instrument. It's not your $12,000 flute. It's not your $8,000 flute. It's you, your free self. Okay. And so it's really important that, and it's hard to commit to this because it feels like a waste of time or something that won't count like it would to play scales for an hour. But if you could commit to 30 minutes a day of these breathing exercises and stretching and actually having maybe 2 or 3 strength training exercises that work specifically your shoulder girdle and alignment with the pelvis and your psoas muscle and all, there's a whole bunch of psoas muscles that can be looked up. And you committed to 30 minutes a day, your playing will be more sustainable in terms of like energy. You're going to get better. You'll be helping avoid injury. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for it. And as far as if you're in the flute studio, you can put it in your practice logs. I'd be excited to see that. Okay, so we have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to open it up for questions and conversation. We didn't get to movement, but we're going to do that next week. Juan, did you have a question? Okay.
So you just talked about how we are our own instruments. So one thing that came to mind when I was thinking of questions for this class was, how do we know when me as an instrument needs to repair something in what I'm doing versus when it's my flute that needs something to change, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so like if you have a leaky sound, are you wondering if it's you making a leaky sound or if your flute is leaking?
Yeah, like how do I better identify what I'm doing that is standing in my way?
Well, I think probably if I could only give one answer to that, it would be just a bunch of trial and error. But the thing for trial and error is that you need a list. So you need to know what you're going to try, right? It's like if you were in a lab and you were testing specimens out or hypotheses out. So you need some kind of list. So let's say your sound is not optimal. What's on that list? Well, the velocity of your air, certainly even the shape of the aperture of the lips could be it. Did you take an optimal breath? What shape is your oral cavity in? So you have like a list. How are you standing? You know, how are you moving between notes? So I think the key is to have a list. And I think the problem that a lot of us have is that we don't actually have that list, or we have a list with like 2 things on it. Like, oh, support. Okay, well, what does support mean, right? I think everybody has that on their list for some reason. Oh, I need to support my sound. Well, but what about your oral cavity, or what about the way you're managing your breath? So, I mean, it's a lifelong journey, and certainly having somebody else who can say, hey, now try this or this or this, which is basically adding things to your list. And then eventually, once you go through things and you know that everything's checked and balanced and right where it needs to be, if something is still not working, it could be your flute. It could also just be the day, you know, the way your body is operating during that day, like muscle fatigue, for example, or just low blood sugar, anything. What other questions do we have? Or even like comments and things you want to share from your own experience that would be helpful.
Sorry if there's echo here, there are a lot of people. But so I was also taught like the belly breathing thing, and I mean, just after being here for 1 semester and trying a different form of breathing, I've noticed so much improvement. So I was wondering, like, why is it something that's so widely taught? Are there certain benefits that, you know, like, aren't achieved by using different forms of expansion?
You know, I think it's a misunderstanding. Just like diaphragmatic vibrato is a misunderstanding. You know, where people talk about don't vibrate with your throat, vibrate with your diaphragm. So I think that you know, we all learn from certain teachers, and every teacher has their own vernacular and their own like pedestal that they get on and want to teach about. And so what happens is then we have lineages. We have lineages of teachers and lineages of things that are taught. And I think in the 60s, somebody wrote a book, I think it was actually a singer, who talked about like not breathing like this, but breathing with the diaphragm. And so this whole lineage of understanding and teaching and discussion and further teaching was born and continued forward. So I think it's just a misunderstanding of physiology. Same thing with the vibrato. You really do use your laryngeal area to create vibrato, but you don't want to use it in a nanny goat kind of way. But there is no such thing as just, you know, vibrating only with your diaphragm, which, by the way, that wasn't my diaphragm. That was my abdominal wall. Okay. In closing, okay, so check out your comments because Tina just commented something. Ethan, you might put your question in the comments. But I thought in closing, it'd be nice to have Sammy share something that she came across this week. Really briefly, Sammy. And then again, if you have to go, please feel free to go. But this was really great, this thing that Sammy shared with me.
Yeah, so I came across this concept of cardiac coherence. And there are different ways to go about practicing it. And you can actually buy like trackers on your phone in order to see like when you're in that coherent state. But essentially it's this meditative breath practice, and you can just type in cardiac coherence on YouTube. It's a 5-minute thing. And the deal is that you inhale as deeply as you can for 5 seconds, you exhale for 5 seconds, and you do this cycle for 5 minutes at a time. And there are a bunch of different studies as to it, like lowering stress levels, changing your cortisol levels. There's a lot of studies behind like high stress jobs with like police officers or prison guards who practice cardiac coherence and are able to deal with high stress situations more clearly and level-headed. But basically what it does is it helps you get unstuck from the emotion of stress. So I don't know if you guys know this, but you can physically be stuck in different emotions, and you have to complete these cycles in order to get out of them. And cardiac coherence is a way to do that. So if you are dealing with a lot of stress right now, I highly recommend, I can just pull up, I'll copy and paste the video that I use. But it's a great way to recenter yourself and retrain your body to have a calm center of gravity and make that your normal versus the constant everyday stress being your normal, if that makes sense. That's like the quickest way I can explain it.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that, which is, thanks, Sammy, I've never heard of that, so I think that's exciting. I'm looking forward to looking into it more. But the more your body is used to being a certain way, the more it craves being that way. So if you do have a regular breathing practice, or you actually are used to expanding like this because you've stretched, and you stop doing it for half a day, like you're gonna crave it. And so the more you can set up like a regular practice for whether it's stretching or breath work or actually doing the cardiac coherence, the better. And the other thing is, once your body knows what that feels like, it's easier to get yourself there. So with one of the things that Sammy was saying the other day about cardiac coherence, that made sense to me, is like, yeah, if you know how to like calm yourself down from breathing because of breath work you've done, you can find that calm much more quickly, because your body, you can create a trigger and your body will be like, oh, this is what you want? Okay, we're in Zen mode right now. And you can get there faster because you have the neurological connections set up because of the work that you've done. Great. Okay, what a fun class. So if you do have further questions, just type them in, and Dustin will send out maybe the transcription of the comments or more links. But you know, it'd be fun to have like 6 hours worth of this type of. And Tina also added something in the list too, which is great. So thanks for all your attention. We didn't actually do the movement today, but in person next on Tuesday we will. So bring your flutes to class. Sorry that we won't be here on Zoom for everybody, and do keep your eyes open for our actual schedule for the whole semester. And I hope that today was really helpful. And Tuesday too. Hopefully you guys have some good material for a really successful semester of practice and everything. Okay, bye.